Hello and welcome to TelecomTV. We're here at the MPLS and SDN World Congress 2015 in Paris. I'm Martyn Warwick and I'm talking with Curt who is the Chief Technology Architect with Brocade. But he's wearing a different hat today because Curt also has another job as the chairman of the group of the ONF's Fowarding Abstractions Working Group. Curt, that's quite a mouthful. I'm glad I did it. Better explain to the viewers who might wonder where we are. We would normally be in a studio or somewhere rather more manageable than this, but because we're outside at an event, we're actually in a cinema, as you can probably tell from the empty seats around us. So that's why we look as low down to the ground as we do. And then, anyway, here we go. Curt, thanks for talking to us. Absolutely. Let's begin by talking about the ONF itself. What does it do, and what is its purpose?
So what it does is it manages the OpenFlow protocol, which began actually before the ONF was established. And its charter, the ONF's charter, is to foster the adoption of software-defined networking. So although it definitely includes the development, the management of the OpenFlow protocol, its charter goes well beyond the OpenFlow protocol. Just recently, it began an open source initiative. There are a number of open source initiatives in the software-defined networking space, but there are gaps between those initiatives. The goal of the ONF is not to duplicate any effort or crowd anybody's existing work, but to fill in the gaps and add value in other areas.
Why is openness so important to SDN?
SDN is essentially, taken broadly, is an effort to do for networking what has been done in the compute space over the years. And so the way we can make decisions and purchases in the compute space, we can buy the platforms from a variety of vendors, we can buy, there's even a choice of operating systems, and we can buy applications from a number of vendors. And we can move between vendors, and there's a good competitive space there. In networking, it's more difficult. You buy your hardware and your software together. Innovation is impeded as a result, and the customers have less control over their destiny. So SDN generally is really intended to open that up and allow for independent purchase of control software from data plane hardware. So open is really central to the SDN notion from the beginning. A related movement is the Network Functions Virtualization, NFV. Similarly, it's also based on openness so that we can buy solutions and run them on our existing infrastructure. We can buy infrastructure from a variety of vendors as well.
Okay, thank you. And what about the Fowarding Abstractions Working Group? It sounds complex. I'm sure it is complex. Can you explain it to the viewers in a fairly straightforward way?
Yeah, and it is, as you say, a little bit complex. What Fowarding Abstractions is focused on is enabling improved interoperability and improved scalability using OpenFlow as a control protocol. So for those who may be familiar with netconf as a protocol, they realize that there's device models involved in netconf. Those device models are written in Yang. And if you move from one device model to a different device model, you switch devices, those devices won't act the same. They'll act much more similarly if they have the same model. And there's a movement now toward open models in netconf. The open config movement is underway. Very similarly, the Fowarding Abstractions Working Group has created a language for developing what are effectively device models for OpenFlow. And they represent them in terms of OpenFlow. These models are called table type patterns, TTPs. And the Fowarding Abstractions Working Group produced a specification for these TTPs last June. Recently, some vendors have been coming forward with their models. Most recently and most visibly is Broadcom, who has produced they call it the OFDPA, OpenFlow Data Plane Abstraction. And it is a TTP that they've been investing in quite a bit. We're quite happy with the work that Broadcom has done.
Does the openness permit the construction of more complex models?
Absolutely. Over time, we can have complex models that support applications that will work on a variety of hardware. And this is the long-term goal. In fact, it's really more the medium-term goal. Near term, it's to work maybe without quite that interoperability, but allow decoupling of applications from hardware, and then to be able to do it where you can replace the hardware from a variety of vendors.
So where does what you're doing fit into the greater plan overall for SDN as a commercial deployment in the network?
As I said before, it'll improve interoperability and also improve the scalability. So scalability in terms of number of devices, might be number of virtual machines, number of addresses, and very importantly is the number of applications. So initially people will tend to deploy single applications on a particular network. That would be a reasonable way to begin, and over time it will be necessary to implement multiple applications running on the same network. That kind of scalability is important for the long term, to really fulfill the long-term promise of SDN and NFV.
Does the group have a finite goal in mind, an end in view? And when that is reached, what will happen? Is this an iterative process which will continue as the technology continues to improve and change? Or do you have a set time and you say, that's it, job done, and move on to something else?
Okay. So that question sounds like it's related maybe to the network functions virtualization. There's an effort in ETSI around that, and it was originally a 2-year effort, and they've extended, or they have phase 2-year effort.
I did have that in mind, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
But does it also pertain to SDN?
I don't see it that way,
right.
No, and I'm not aware of any kind of time-bound perspective. There's another way to look at it, which is more on the order of the 3GPP, which has a series of generations. That's the way I think is more, and the generations are more as maturity and technology and evolution drives it, as opposed to being calendar driven. And I think that's the way we're going to see it. So even now, as we're starting to talk about 5G in our mobile networks, there's still 2G is in lots of places in the world, and so there's 2 and 3 and 4 and not that long from now will be 5. And I expect it will be similar in the SDN space, although I think we have the advantage, we always get to learn from, we learn in open source from Linux, we learn in networking from the mobile networks, and so on. So we may be able to leapfrog some of those early generations.
So what about the next step? Where do you go from here?
We work more on conformance testing so that we can validate that 2 products are really interoperable. We work on production deployments, and of course there's always something to learn in those production deployments. Take what we learn, roll it back into our open source and into our open standard.
Okay, can we broaden the conversation out just briefly, which is to take in a bit more of the sort of business area behind all this? And I'd like to ask you, SDN and NFV for that case, is as much about business transformation as it is about network transformation. What do you think service providers need to do from a business transformation point of view to ensure they can take full advantage of SDN?
Oh, wow. Now that's a question I haven't thought a lot about. I think one of the things we do encounter, though, in a lot of our conversations is that, like many businesses, for efficiency reasons, in a stable environment, it makes sense to develop what amounts to silos. And so you'll have the networking team and the compute team and the application team and the storage team, and they're all independent and they're focused on their expertise, and that all makes sense. As things get much more dynamic and active and fluid, and now we have also orchestration systems that work across all those different areas, it becomes much more difficult to keep those disciplines isolated and separate. So one of the needs is to figure out how to work across teams. The teams will still be needed, even as we look at orchestration and automation and so on. What will happen as these new technologies are deployed is the demand for IT services is going to explode even faster than it has currently been exploding. So there will be no question that the workforces will remain the same or grow, but the nature of work will be a bit more cross-disciplinary. It will require much more advanced planning and architecture, and it won't be up to humans to fix the bugs, or to set up a configuration in the same way that we've done that in the past. So I would say the change that I would look to see in the industry is that network operators will have to help their teams engage with each other and work much more cross-disciplinary, cross-functionally.
Which echoes also what's been going on in the greater industry, which is cloud, SDN, NFV, etc. Network transformation overall is bringing together competitors, rivals, and those that were at daggers drawn with each other in the past. They now work collaboratively, whether it's full-time or for the purpose of a particular exercise, whatever it may be. So the same thing is happening within the networking industry itself as well as it is with the other companies.
Absolutely, and it's interesting. There's a book I read some time ago by Robert Wright called Non-Zero, and it talks about how humanity has made progress by collaborating more and more over time on larger and larger scales, and the humanity that collaborates is more successful than humanity that doesn't. So that's true in our industry here as well. If you try to go it alone, and even if you're big and you try and do everything, you won't be able to compete with a very collaborative set of competitors that work well together. And you might say that's happened to a number of large industry players in the industry. IBM, I think, was a go it alone for a long time. They're much more of a collaborative organization than they were before. I would say Google is more collaborative than Microsoft, although Microsoft has evolved quite a bit in response, right? So these organizations have had to reinvent themselves and become more partner-oriented, and that's what is going to happen in the networking space as well.
Interesting, but we're out of time, Curt, I'm afraid. So, Curt Beckman, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Martyn.